Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I'm the minister for the Marquette Church of Christ. Glad you are here this morning. We are on the 6th out of 7 weeks in this series on prayer. Today, the title of our lesson is Crying Out from the Abyss. This is based off of a passage in Psalm 130, Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. There is this woman who was at the grocery store, and she hadn't been to church services in a long time. She's a Christian. If you were to ask her, she's a Christian, and she her faith is intact. Again, if you would ask her, she is completely faithful, but she had not been in church services for a long time. What had happened was that her husband was caught cheating on her, and that led to a pretty nasty divorce and everything else. And anyway, over the last several months, she had not been in any church service where she normally attends. And one of the elders for this church runs into her at the grocery store one day, just on a weekday. And they start to talking, and the elder says something along the lines of, "Hey, I noticed you hadn't been in worship in a long time." And she says, "Yeah, I feel like I've not been in the right headspace for it. All these people in worship are going to be smiling, and they're going to be greeting me, and they're going to be singing songs about blue skies and rainbows, and I don't know. I don't feel like that right now." She's grieving, right? Now, there is this misconception that exists out there that Christians, among Christians, that God doesn't want your grief, or He can't handle it, right? He can't handle the negative emotions that we feel, or maybe they don't have a place in the church. Now, that misperception is exacerbated by the fact that there are absolutely Christians who, on seeing somebody who is down in the dumps or whatever, they'll say things, shallow, kind of insensitive things. Turn that frown upside down, or how can you be sad when Jesus did this for you? They'll say things like that, and frankly, it's not helpful, right? But it relays this idea that sadness, grief, it doesn't really have a place in the church. I'm going to read a few passages to you, and I just want you to keep an open mind, see what similarities exist between these various passages that we're going to get into. So let's start here in Psalm 31, starting in verse 9. "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away." This is a prayer of David, who in his life, he experienced a tremendous amount of tragedy. We don't know what prayer this is necessarily in response to. At one point, he loses his son. At one point, he loses a daughter. He actually loses another son on top of that. At one point, his son rebels against him, and he's chased around by Saul for a number of years. He's trying to kill him for really no good reason. A lot of tragedy in his life, and what does he do? He cries out to God. In Job chapter 2, verse 13, Job has just lost everything. He's lost his health, his family, his home, and what happens? Job chapter 2, verse 13, his friends come to him, and look what they do. "And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great." They just grieved with him, right? In John chapter 11, one of the most interesting passages in the New Testament, specifically John 11:35, notoriously one of the shortest verses in the Bible, just says, "Jesus wept." Now, what's interesting about this is that this is in the wake of the death of Lazarus. And Jesus is going up to Mary and Martha, who are grieving his loss, and other people are grieving along with them. And the thing is, Jesus knows what's about to happen, namely that he's about to raise him from the dead. But even with that, what does Jesus do? He goes up with them and he weeps. He grieves with them. Right? Was David, was Job, was Jesus, were they wrong? Were they smitten by God? Did lightning come down from the heavens? Were they rebuked in the subsequent passages for grieving? Obviously not, right? Right? Despite what people may think or say, the Bible very much leaves room and provides us language to grieve, to be confused, to doubt, right? It really does. Hannah is introduced in the beginning of in the book of 1 Samuel, and this is going to be the mother of the prophet Samuel, after whom the book is named. But in 1 Samuel chapter 1, we're introduced to this woman who's barren. She's not able to have children. And I want you to look at what happens here as she grieves. 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting in verse 6. And her rival, by the way, her husband was married to 2 women. Her rival used to provoke her grievously and irritate her because the Lord closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, which they did yearly, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. She's invoking something called a Nazirite vow. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. So Hannah is grieving before her husband at first, Elkanah. And what does Elkanah say? Don't you care about me? Don't I make you happy? And then Eli the priest sees her grieving and says, oh, wow, this mad, crazy woman, she must be drunk. There are going to be a lot of people around you. If you ever enter into a period of grief, there are going to be a lot of people around you who reject your grief, or at best, who misunderstand it. But that doesn't mean that God has, and that doesn't mean that it's not real. The Bible overwhelmingly supports these expressions of grief, really to a point that a lot of people actually find a bit uncomfortable. There's this one passage in Psalm 137, verse 9. This is a passage that takes place during this period of exile where the Israelites are in this foreign land and their home's been destroyed. Look at what it says in Psalm 137, starting in verse 7. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. There are going to be some people that are really uncomfortable with this passage being here. But here's the thing. Just because it is there in the way that it is, does that mean that it is a moral imperative? Is David, through that prayer, telling us that's what we ought to do? No, obviously not. Does it mean that God actually did that? No, it doesn't. It's an expression of grief. This is exactly what the Babylonians did to the Israelites. And so what he's doing is he recognizes that and says, oh, I hope you get what's coming to you, It's an expression of grief. Is there any sort of passage after this that rebuts that and says, oh, but David really shouldn't have said that? It's not in there. It just goes on to the next psalm. That's the end of it. It is an expression of grief, right? Jesus, when he's on the cross, what does he do? In Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, this is actually a quote from Psalm 22. He says, the gospel reads, "About the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying," and this is a quote from Psalm 22, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Now, some people have looked at that and said, they've tried to make all sorts of theological observations about this. You know, they'll conclude, oh, okay, well, God turned his back on Jesus in that moment. Now, maybe you can still make that case some way or another, but more than anything, what is Jesus doing here? Is this a theological observation? No, it's an expression of grief. He feels as if God has abandoned him. And so he uses this language that he knows that the Bible offers us language for. In Psalm 22, he evokes that. My God, why have you forsaken me? You know, Jesus in Isaiah 53, verse 3, he's referred to as the man of sorrows. You know, which if nothing else, I think we can infer, oh, well, maybe we can bring him our sorrows, right? He understands what it is like to suffer. Historically speaking, there absolutely has been this misperception of the church being presented to the public as this, it's this place that's totally clean, it's full of perfect people, there's no pain involved anywhere within the church, and that's sort of the public presentation of it. Now, there is a hint of truth in there. And what I mean by that is that the church is supposed to be a place of sinners who have been sanctified from that sin, who have been made perfect, made holy, but they were at one time sinners. And we are worshiping a perfect God and anticipating this future that's going to come where it will be free of suffering and pain and death and all of that. So it alludes to something that is true, but that does not mean that the church is exempt from messiness. And I mean messiness on a personal level and messiness on the level of just church broadly, right? There are mistakes made. There are people who mess up. There are hypocrites, right? It's messy. It's painful sometimes. In fact, if anything, we're warned in the New Testament that there is suffering that should be expected to come within the church if we are indeed following Christ, picking up our cross. Right? There is room in the church and there is room in our prayers for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, one of the things we need to acknowledge with this is that when we talk about grief in the Bible, it is consistently followed up with redemption. Right? God, he's perfectly willing to accept your grief. There's no doubt about that. He is perfectly willing to accept your grief. There is room for that. There's language provided for that. But he's not going to allow you to stay there forever. There's plenty of evidence of this. One of my favorite Psalms, Psalm chapter 30, verse 5. Throughout the whole Psalm, David is actually talking about this time. He's recalling a time in the past where he became very sick. And he was close to dying. And then God healed him. And in the wake of that healing, after he had prayed for healing and after God healed him, what does he say in Psalm 30, verse 5? Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. In Romans chapter 8, chapter 8, verse 18, Paul talking about the suffering of the righteous. And he says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." When Job lost everything, and he really lost everything, like more than any of us have probably ever experienced, Like I mentioned, he lost his health, he lost his family, lost his home. His wife pretty much abandoned him, told him to curse God and die. Right? He loses all of this, everything. And in the end, after all of that is over, in Job 42, verse 10, there's this remark that afterwards God restored the fortunes of Job. And he actually, at the end of it, had twice as much as he did originally. Now, when Job was right in the thick of it, when he's in the middle of that suffering, do you think that's something that he was thinking about? He said, one day I'm going to have twice as much as I originally did. No, he probably didn't see a way out. That's probably where a lot of you either are or have been at some point. You're probably looking at your situation and going, I don't see a way out, right? But God can offer a way out, right? He's not going to let you stay in that abyss forever. Lazarus, even though he had died, well, what happens in John chapter 11, verse 44? Jesus cries out to the tomb and says, Lazarus, get up. And he gets up and he walks out of the tomb and he's alive again, right? Even after Jesus wept over his death. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 6, we see that Jesus, in the wake of dying on the cross, he ends up buried, and he ends up being placed in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. But then in Matthew 28, verse 6, you have the women going looking for him, and this angel says, why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He is risen. God accepts your grief. He'll allow Jesus on the cross to say, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? But then that grief and that suffering will be transformed into redemption. Right? Christians can and should cry out to God in prayer whenever we find ourselves drowning. There is this temptation I've found among Christians. We'll think about the positions we find ourselves in, and we think, woe is me, and we're in a place of lamentation. And there is this temptation to say, well, I don't know if I'm in the right headspace to go and worship God. I don't know if I want to go and sing Blue Skies and Rainbows with all of these way too happy people who are way too smiley and want me to be smiley too. Now, I understand the annoyance. I understand that. Very sympathetic to that. But don't fall into this lie that those periods of negative emotion are the times where you need to distance yourselves from God. It's actually the exact opposite. In those moments when we feel like we need to distance ourselves from God because things don't feel quite right, because you don't really feel like you're in the right headspace, or you don't feel like things are going well with regards to your faith or whatever, that's not the time you need to retreat from God. That's the time you need to be nearest to Him. Right? You can and should cry out to the abyss, but don't be surprised when God pulls you onto the shore, because that's exactly what He demonstrated He does time and time again over the course of Scripture. It happened with Job, happened with Lazarus, happened with Jesus, and it can happen with you. Right? It may not always happen in the way that you want or expect, but that redemption will come one way or another. There's a passage I want to read to you. This is from James chapter 4, starting in verse 7. I think this is a very relevant passage to read as long as we're talking about suffering and praying. Look what it says. James chapter 4, verse 7. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Now, this is a really fascinating passage. You know, there are some passages that you can look at that talk about rejoice in the Lord always, right? You have some passages like this. Here, he actually does the opposite. He says, be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning. Why do we need to do that? Because we need to be honest, right? If we're in a place where we don't feel like rejoicing, we need to be able to come to God in that relationship, right? We need to be able to come to God and be honest about that. Because until we are honest about that and come to God with our problems, with the things that are stressing us out, with the things that we need resolved that we don't have control over, until we do that, what do you expect to happen? It's not until we go to God and are honest with Him and make that petition. Only then is there going to be any sort of real difference made, right? So if you're in this place where you're finding it difficult to do the things that you feel like you ought to do, you're finding it difficult to go to worship and to put on a smile and all that, for one thing, know that that is perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with that. And two, that is a time you need to go to God in prayer and be as honest as possible. And then when you do that, that is what is going to enable you to go to the worship. And now you can sing blue skies and rainbows, not because it is that way in your life right now, but because you know that out of this abyss, this chaos that you're in, you know that that redemption at some point or another is going to come. And you can sing about that redemption. That is really important. In Philippians chapter 4, we get a similar passage to this. This passage, it's James 4. If I can find it here. You know, it's funny. Sometimes I will have a passage in the middle of Zephaniah, and I will get there instantly. But I have a passage in somewhere like Philippians that I should know almost exactly where that is immediately. And it takes me forever to find it. I don't know if you're the same way. Anyway, Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Some of you have experienced what that's like. Be honest with God. If you feel like you're drowning, cry out to God in prayer. Right after this episode ends, we've done this multiple times in this series. Right after this episode ends, go to God in prayer. And when you go to God in prayer, be honest about the things that you're struggling with. Be honest about the things that you are fighting and the negative emotions that you're feeling. Be honest and ask for God's help. You'll be shocked at the difference that makes. Before we wrap up, I do want to tell you about some of the various resources we have for all of our listeners and viewers out there. First of all, we have a 7-part workbook series. This is published by the World Bible School. You can, you can participate in this either by mail or online at theworldbibleschool.org. Either one is perfectly fine. If you're doing it by mail, you'll be interacting with somebody at the Escanaba Church of Christ. Online, you'll be interacting with somebody somewhere in the country. You're just assigned somebody random who's on the mentor side of that program. So worldbibleschool.org if you'd like to participate in that, or just let us know that you want to participate. If you do not have a Bible, we want you to have one. Just let us know, and we'd be happy to send you one, totally free of charge. There's no expectation on your end to pay for the Bible, to pay for shipping, any of that. We'd love to get that to you. Just send that to us with an address, and be sure to include in there if you need a large print Bible. It's not actually all that large, but if you think you might need a large print Bible, you probably do. The regular print is tiny, just so you're aware. If you have the chance, be sure to go to letthebiblespeak.net. That has all the different information about our ministry, some of the history of our ministry, some of the local churches that are in the area, feel free to explore that website a little bit. Again, that's letthebiblespeak.net. And if you'd like to listen to any of these episodes, you can do so with any of those apps there on the right side of your screen. All you need to do is search Let the Bible Speak UP. If you search Let the Bible Speak, you will get a different program, actually. So make sure to add that UP there in the end. Let the Bible Speak UP. You can also do the same thing on YouTube, and it'll come up with the video and audio for each of our episodes. We upload those every week and keep that up to date on a regular basis. If you've not gotten a chance to join us for worship, please do so. We'd love to see you at the Marquette Church of Christ in Escanaba. Those are just the two we put addresses for up there. There are some others in the area as well. Again, go to letthebiblespeak.net for more of those addresses and information. But both of us in Marquette and Escanaba, we meet at 11 a.m. We'd love to see you worship with us. Just a heads up, I know I mentioned it last week, but through the month of February, we are only going to be on Fox UP at 8 a.m. The TV6 showing is preempted for national broadcasting for the Winter Olympics, but that's only going to last through the month of February. So when we get to March, it's going to be back on the two networks again. This is temporary, but for the next couple weeks, we're only going to be on Fox UP at 8 a.m. So be sure to tune in then, and if you don't see us at 10 o'clock, that's why. So we want to make sure, and I need to double check, how much time do we have left? Okay, so we have more time than I thought. So just to let you know something, we have a 50th anniversary coming up in the month of March. And what we're going to do tied to that is we actually have a number of special episodes we're going to broadcast. One of those, the first one, is going to air on March 8th, I believe. And that's going to be with myself and Dave Grant. It's going to be an interview where I talk to him about the history of the program. The next 2 weeks after that, we're going to talk quite a bit about the mission of the program. That's going to be with myself, Dave Grant, Brian Poe, and Jim Larson. Some names and faces that I'm sure some of you who've been watching the program for a while will recognize. So we're excited to do that on the next 2 weeks after. And then on March 29th, we're going to have a 1-hour special where we talk about, where it's actually a worship service that we're going to air and let you all participate in. So we look forward to all that. In the meantime, God bless you. Have a wonderful week.